We're starting today a reading of the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. It's one of the seminal texts in modern Islamic thought, and it's important that we understand our classical texts, because it is only by understanding them and placing ourselves in their context that we can develop those classical movements in our thoughts. So we are going to read it slowly. It's not a book in the normal sense of the word, because it's a collection of lectures. So start with a preface, short preface, which we will read, and then there are some heavy chapters, especially the first two ones, knowledge and religious experience, and the philosophical test of the revelations of religious experience, and then more practical and moral and political concepts, which are a bit easier to understand. No, not yet. The conception of God, then meaning of prayer, and the human ego is freedom and immortality. And the spirit of Islamic culture deals with Islamic law and the principal movement in the structure of Islam. And the last one, which is sort of which was a lecture given separately from other 4 or 5 lectures, so sort of covers most of the material in these lectures. So the last lecture is sort of reiteration of the first 4 or 5 lectures. Before we start reading it, I think it's important that we situate this book, especially situate it in the sense that, what discipline this text belong to. I think it's only after determining that basic question that we can understand the real and lasting relevance of this work. So I'll submit that the topic of this text is kalam. Now, kalam is generally translated as, theology, or scholastic theology. But I think although there are parallels between theology and kalam, kalam is a discipline in its own right, which is studied in Islamic seminaries and schools, and it has many schools of thoughts within it. So it's better not to translate it and try to understand what it means. Kalam, or ilmul kalam, as in Arabic. So kalam, the definition of kalam or ilmul kalam can be divided into two types: positive definitions or positive notion of ilm al-kalam and negative notion of ilm al-kalam. So, kalam, the very important science. In fact, Ghazali considers it as the most fundamental science in the sense that it deals with the question of being. And only once we have dealt with the question of being, according to him, we can establish the existence of God. And only once we have established the possibility of God and a possibility of its existence, you can talk about the prophet and the book and the messenger and the religion and Islam, for example. So kalam in this sense is the very foundation of Islam. So from there we get the two senses of kalam. Positive in the sense that it's the discipline which establishes the rational justification of Islam. Or to be more precise, it's a discipline which provides the rational justification of Islam. And we need rational justification because, as our classical mutakallimin, that is the practitioners of kalam, keep saying, is that we can't start or establish the truth of Islam by referring back to Quran, for example, because if you are a Muslim, you don't need to do that. And if you are not a Muslim, Quran is not a binding authority on you. So that's why you need to refer to something which is common among us, which is reason. So that's why it's the reason from where we start, and reason, and on rational basis we proceed. And once we establish the existence of Quran, then we can existence of God, then we can establish the truth of the messenger. And once we establish the truth of messenger, then we can establish the truth of Quran. And once we have established the truth of Quran, then Quran becomes binding to us. This is the classical argument of at least two school, at least Asharaj, for example. Al-Asha'ira. And probably Al-Maturidis are not much different from this, although this position is criticized by or critiqued by Hanbali school in general, Hanbali school of Kalam, especially Ibn Taymiyyah, and we don't need to go into that. So these three main schools, nowadays this is known as Salafi school. It's basically a Hanbali school. Um, where was I? So that's the positive sense of ilm al-kalam. Positive. Rational justification of Islam. Not in the sense of apology, a Christian apologetic tradition, but because the foundation is truth, so it must be. Something positive in that sense. And second, and negative conception of ilm al-kalam, and that's also important. Negative conception is to defend Islam. So once you know that Islam is truth, now you defend it against internal and external critics. So that's the ongoing process. You always need to, because the criticism keep changing, So modern day, and some criticism obviously remain the same. Okay, so these are two definitions of ilm al-kalam, and the ilm al-kalam in all three or four. So we have three Sunni school, Asharites and Maturidites and Hanbalites. And Shia ilm al-kalam, Shias are mostly Mu'tazilites today, which is strange, because Mu'tazilite. How do you write Mu'tazilite? Mu'tazilite. Okay. Al-Mu'tazila. We'll study about these different schools of thought in another series, hopefully. But here what I want to just say is Iqbal's Reconstruction of religious thought in Islam is a book of kalam, really. And a book of kalam in both senses. Positive and negative sense. And so it does this positive, rational justification of Islam. In negative sense, it defends Islam against especially modern doubts and objections which arise from the interaction between Islam and imperialism, Western imperialism, or which we also call Western modernity, the same things basically. So why is it important to situate this book in this way? By the way, I'm not saying that you can't, situate this book in any other way, but this is the most fruitful contextualization which I can think of, and that's my interest in this book. So I'm not saying this is the way to read this book, but I think this is one of the important way this book should be read, and I think unfortunately it hasn't been read in that way generally. Why is it important to contextualize this book in this way? I think because unless you do this book doesn't have much lasting value, in the sense that because a lot of its debates are now old, and obviously as one of the first attempt to develop a new ilm al-kalam, there are a lot of errors in his understanding of Islam, as well as errors in his understanding of the West, and errors then in application, justification, and such. So, and that's how normally people read this book. But that's a very limited and narrow way of reading this book, because if you read this book in this way, it doesn't have much value really from my viewpoint. But if we read this book as a book in Ilm al-Kalam, which try to establish a new school of Ilm al-Kalam, because the rise of modernity, because circumstances have changed. So questions and tasks can't be the same as they were 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. So it provides a prototype for continuing this sort of work. So that's just lasting. So in the reading of the book, we'll try to keep this in mind and see, what is lasting in this book, which can be further developed according to our needs. So I think I'll stop it there, and next time we'll start with the reading of the preface. Prefaces of philosophical and intellectual books are always very important. This book's preface is important, so we start with the preface and then we'll go on to the first chapter and so on. Okay, see you in the next.